I am going to do an episode today about the number one thing I think you need to be successful in a relationship or to have a successful relationship. Welcome back to Human to Human. My name is Jess. I'm your host. My human to human moment of the week, which is something that happened between me and another human at some point over the course of my last week that reminded me of the importance of human to human connection. I'm doing this every episode. That was the description. But the moment that reminded me of the importance of human connection today was I had my second call with a brand new therapist who I've never talked to before, and we actually got into talking about values and what my values are, how they differ from different relationships in my life, and it's literally right on theme for this episode because the number one thing I think that you need in order to have a successful relationship is aligned values. Okay, so what the fuck are values? There's a few different ways you can go about thinking about what your values are, but they're essentially very personal to you as a human being, and they're kind of the foundation of what's important to you, what you believe in, and they influence how you navigate the world, how you navigate your relationships. And I'm going to talk about them in terms of two different kind of avenues. My new therapist gave me this sheet called Values Clarification. Essentially, it's a long list of different things such as love, loyalty, independence, spirituality, stability, fun, adventure, and they all kind of have, and what this kind of activity instructs you to do is to look at this list and pick, what my therapist told me to do was to pick my top 10. And so it's kind of cool when you get to look at it. I'll post a picture on Instagram just so if you're interested in doing this, you can do it alongside me, I guess, because when I read it out loud, I feel like it's harder to pull out the ones that feel the most aligned to you. But so basically I looked at this list and different things jump out at me as okay, yes, love is a big value of mine, and so is peace. I want to feel inner peace. I also care so much about love between individuals. I am a person who feels a lot of love and, human to human connection. That's what I fucking stand for. And so it's kind of cool looking at this and thinking about what your values are. And then let's say you look at this list and you think about what are your partner's values or what are your friends' values? And I said to my therapist, I'm if I think about different people in my life, different things stand out to me. This person definitely values knowledge more than I value knowledge. Or this other person in my life definitely values relaxation. And so you can kind of start to see who your values are most aligned with and who your values kind of differ from. And what I think is most important in a romantic relationship is to have some values that are really at your core align with each other. And another form of values that I like to think about is more in terms of your life goals or the things you really care about or the things you really want to spend your time on and how that's important to be aligned with your partner. But let's sit back for a second and think about, what's your goal with a romantic relationship? Because for me, my goal and what I want out of a romantic relationship is deep connection, and I want to be able to relate to each other on our creative endeavors and our passions. Because for me, my life goal is to be able to pursue my podcast, and I want to do life coaching, and I want to have a job that's not the standard 9-to-5 model. And so for me, dating someone who maybe cares a lot about going to work and being able to close their laptop at 5, enjoy their weekend, and not even think about it until 9 a.m. on Monday, we might have very different outlooks on life and work and what we do in our free time. And so that person might not be the best life partner for me. But again, in a romantic relationship, I'm more looking for someone to grow, change, evolve, and become with me and become my life partner. And one of my values is family. I want to have kids one day. So dating someone who also has that same feeling of that, they want that for their life, that's really important to me. But you might have a completely different view on dating. You might be in a phase of life, or you might overall just feel in your life I don't want a life partner. I would rather casually date. So if, let's say, your life goal is to travel the world and you're dating someone who likes to more just vacation, just go on a really chill vacation, you could still date them. I think there might not be this like longevity of you guys are going to be life partners and align on all the same things. You know what I mean? But it all depends on what you want out of a relationship. And so what I'm saying, if it doesn't fuck with you, throw it out the window and think about your own priorities for your life and how that will then influence a relationship. Different forms of values also come in terms of like your political views, where you culturally come from, what you are kind of an activist about. I think we all have causes that are really, really important to us. And I think there could be a lot of issues in a relationship if you are having completely different opinions on like LGBTQ plus rights or the Black Lives Matter movement or abortion laws. If you're dating someone who has a completely different point of view, then that might end up coming up as a very big fight in your relationship. And it's really, really interesting when a couple has the same fight over and over again, but it doesn't feel like the same fight. It doesn't on the surface appear to be the same fight. But when you look deep down and dive into like, what's the root of this? If you like sit back and you're like, okay, what's the theme of this fight that we keep having? You can probably pinpoint something. And that might be you care deeply about the importance of your bodily autonomy, and you're dating someone who maybe like thinks that like women should be more conservative and not post their bodies on Instagram. You're gonna have a big fucking problem in that relationship, and that's something that probably won't be able to carry with you and work through the test of time. Like, you know, when you go through hard stuff in life, if that person has a completely different outlook and value belief system inside of them, they might not have your back in a situation where like you need them to have your back. And that's why I wanted to make this episode, because I've definitely struggled in relationships where I've had fights and have gone through different experiences where when I look at it, I'm like, oh, we believed different things about this certain topic, or like we wanted different things for our lives. And this episode topic really came to mind because my boyfriend and I, we've been together for a bit over a year and a half, and we keep having these moments where we're like, holy shit, like we have such similar like passions for our creative endeavors. Like I have a podcast and he makes music, Josh Roy on Spotify, go check it out. And so when he talks about his music, I can relate oftentimes in a similar way to how I feel about my podcast. And it's this thing that we get to just like bond over and really like enjoy talking about together. And we both talk about how we stress about like the societal pressures and pressures from our families about having a normal 9-to-5 job, but like we really just want to invest more time in our creative, passionate things that we're doing. And let's say I was dating someone who wanted to travel the world and that was their big goal. And for me, like I like travel, but travel definitely isn't my like number one thing I want to do with my life. Like backpacking through Europe scares me. I like need stability. Again, stability. If you go back to the values list, stability is something that really jumps out at me as a really important thing to have in my life. And so if I'm not dating someone with that same value, I might prefer to spend a Saturday night fucking playing some sort of fun board game at home or connecting or going on a walk or whatever. But if I'm dating someone who wants to go like, I don't know, a crazy adventure, there's gonna be a disconnect. There's gonna be some things that arise that are a problem worthy. They're gonna create some, arguments, I would say. So it's interesting to sit back and think about your values, and overall, you don't even have to think about this in a relationship sense. Think about all the different friendships you have in your life or the different relationships you have with family members, and think about, what do they value most? Is it independence? Is it spirituality? Is it stability? Is it wisdom? Is it adventure? Is it success? Wealth? Family? These are some of the different lists of things, and you can kind of just validate your own experience if you're like, oh, that person I really don't feel connected to, or that person I prefer to talk to about this and not this. And that's completely okay, because you might have different things you're trying to like strive for and achieve in life, and values change. I have found, and this is what I kind of realized when I was talking with my therapist, was that when I look at this values list, mine would be completely different 4 years ago. Mine would be completely different. Might even be different in years to come. And that's completely like expected, even, because we're going to learn different things about ourselves. And the coolest thing about life is like when you try different things out, you realize what you like and what you don't like. And so, boom, changes your value. Maybe I always wanted freedom, and then I realize how confusing, exhausting, tiring, or whatever, I realize that's not my thing. Freedom, I care more about stability than freedom. Then, well, one might just like replace another or just get higher up on the priority list of my own values. And for a second, I want to go back to cultural differences, because just because you have different cultural experiences, or let's say political views might be a little different, but I don't know, we'll see. It all depends on you, your sitch. But for my boyfriend and I, we are an interracial couple. He's Indian, I'm super white Canadian, and people will say to us like, oh, I don't know, like, you know, there's going to be like cultural differences that come up and like that might cause some problems. Okay, first of all, I would like to say to these people, we've been together for, it'll be 2 years in May. So we've had already cultural differences become very clear and very apparent. And for him and I, maybe that would be something that could break up a relationship. 1000%. If I like, it's funny to bring up like weddings and marriage and stuff, but it's just interesting because like that's where like people have very solid like expectations on what they want, for example. And so like we've talked about those kind of things, especially because he has a family member getting married. So there's a lot of like wedding talk going on, and there's certain things that are happening where I'm like, oh my God, I don't think I would want that at my wedding, or like I wouldn't want to do this way. And so I've been getting to like vocalize my opinions on that and hear his responses. And like, let's say he had a completely different expectation for what he wants. That might be a bigger reflection of like our own cultural beliefs and values. And it's kind of funny to me when family members will be like, well, you know, you're going to like, you know, figure out, you're going to eventually become confronted with these cultural differences. And it's like, well, we already have really deeply talked about cultural differences, and we've talked about racism, and we've talked about how people view us as an interracial couple and how race shows up in both of our lives differently, and the privilege I've had and his experience he's had, and blah, 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 blah. And we've also very deeply acknowledged that, like, yeah, there will be conversations about race for the rest of our lives if we continue to be in this relationship. Also, the rest of your lives in general. You know what I mean? It's just the fact that, like, full disclosure, I'm going to be the first person in my family to bring someone around who's not white. So, yeah, for the course of our entire relationship, there will be conversations that need to be had between the two of us and between our families about different things that come up because of this difference. And so for us, we have kind of gotten into the nitty-gritty of these situations and these conversations and the hardships and the tears and the weirdness and all of this bullshit around race and prejudice and all of this stuff. And it's made us know, okay, we have a similar like way we want to go about it. And we've been able to like identify different, what do you call them? Like soft points or trigger points where, or yeah, I don't know. I feel like you know what I mean, where like, you know, we're going to be conscious of this forever. And so just because there's a difference in how you were raised or where you're from or some sort of value or belief you may have doesn't mean it's not going to work. People also always say like opposites attract. And it's like, yeah, it's also really great to have a balance of, I learned so much from my boyfriend's experience that as someone who is white and has held that privilege, I would never have experienced because like I didn't grow up that way. I grew and society treats me differently. And we also acknowledge like society treats me different as a woman than it treats him as a man. And you need to be able to have those conversations in a relationship, in my opinion, if your goal is to like be deeply connected and like be very vulnerable and know each other on this like next kind of emotional level. And that might not be your goal, and that's totally fine. And that's why I keep wanting to preface that, because like I'm talking from my own experience, where I also like, my parents have been together since they were in high school. Like I've always been in my teens and 20s being like, putting that pressure on myself to want like a life partner at a young age. And this is just kind of a fun, cool, interesting, also hard way to establish, how am I going to find that in a way that honors myself, in a way that feels good. And when you date someone whose values really align with yours, I think it's an incredibly empowering thing. And my boyfriend and I have said too, like when we've kind of realized our values are really connected over our most important things, for like an example, like when our values are connected over those most important things, weird little things fall into place. Weird little things that you would never put on your like non-negotiable list, but are just like a bonus in a relationship, they weirdly fall into place. For example, my boyfriend was like shocked when we first started dating, because he's like, you don't vape? And like the place he's grown up, every girl vapes, and also probably every guy, or at least everyone's had a vaping phase. And like, no shame to the vapors, but like I've just never been someone who vapes. And he was like, I cannot believe I've met someone who doesn't vape. And so it's that funny like, yeah, but we also have all of these like higher level, like deep rooted soul level values that like, it kind of makes sense when you think about how things like trickle out to random little quirks that you have or habits that you have, and go, oh, okay, yeah, no, I guess that makes sense that you don't vape, because that's not something like I want to do. Weird other things have come up too. Like, he's not insanely into sports. He plays some sports and he'll like go to a bar with his friends to watch a Raptors game, but he's not like obsessed with watching the entire football season or basketball season or whatever. And for me, I have dated people who have been really into sports, and like I'm like, okay, cool, whatever, you do you. I'm not into sports. It's not really my thing. And so it's interesting to date someone who like could take it or leave it. And I've sat with myself and been like, oh shit, I can't believe you actually don't care that much, and I don't have to pretend to care too. And I'm like, oh, that's like so awesome. What the fuck? This is like, what? And so that's why I really encourage you to do this work on yourself, to sit back and kind of realize what you care most about, because then all these other things come up that you're aligned on that wouldn't have really mattered if I dated someone who loved sports, like whatever. But I think it comes down to being a product of these deeper beliefs that we hold inside of us. So, the last thing I want to touch on is something I did 2 years ago that helped me get more clear on, yes, my values, but more my non-negotiable list. And this is a list of things that I will not settle on. Like, if I am looking for a partner, these are things that like he must have. Oh, and before I get into that, I wanted to finish off a thought I had about when, like, let's say, like, my dream goal isn't to travel, and, like, maybe that means dating someone who like, really wants to travel. Like, that might not be the best match for me, but it also means that, like, that person can still be in my circle. Do you know what I mean? Like, I think about different friends I have. I'm like, a lot of my friends have different, like, life goals for themselves, but they're definitely, like, people I, like, connect with and can, like, get excited hearing about their life goals and values, and they get excited about mine, even though they're different. And so just know that, like, just because I'm saying, like, maybe it's not the best idea to date someone who, like, let's say you want to have kids and you're dating someone who doesn't want to have kids, that's not probably going to do well in however many years when you start to want to have kids and they don't. Like, that's not, like, I feel like, you know, that's not going to work out. But that doesn't mean they can't be someone, like, in your life that you enjoy talking to. Okay, so I made this list June 4th of 2020, and this was a really interesting time because I was very, very single, and I was like really wanting a boyfriend, and I was in my like desperate single girl era. Okay, that's what we'll call it. And I was talking to my therapist at the time, being like, what the fuck do I do? All I do is think about boys. How do I stop thinking about boys? And a little fun tip: She was like, your brain is like Google. It's like a search bar. So it doesn't hear stop thinking about boys. It just hears boys. So it was interesting. She's like, you kind of got to redirect that shit to think about things that like make you really excited that don't involve boys, I guess. Oh my God, I was about to write this thought down, but that just made me think of how to meet people who are aligned with your values. I'm just going to go there for a second, and then I'll come back to the non-negotiable list, because this girl's got a little bit of ADHD. My brain just goes in every direction, and that's why I'm trying to like slow down when I record podcast episodes, because then I can actually like remember where I was going and finish the thoughts that I don't finish. So here we go. I met my boyfriend through Human to Human. I had a guest on who he was acquaintances with from high school, and he saw that guy post on Instagram, and so my boyfriend saw that and was like, oh my God, this girl's a podcast? Like, what is happening? Who is this girl? He said he thought to himself, oh, like, I had never seen someone my age do something like this. It was really interesting to me. So he followed me and DM'd me saying like, hey, just found this podcast. It's so cool. Keep doing what you're doing. Quote. And then I followed him. I was like, who is this sexy man? Like, telling me my podcast is cool. Like, what the fuck? And so I followed him back, and I was like, oh, and I started to see like, oh, he makes music. So I did the casual like swipe up on the story, being like, oh my God, this sounds so cool. Can't wait to like listen to your new song or like hear your song drop. And then like a couple weeks later, he like responded to a reel I posted about COVID with this like paragraph on his thoughts on it. And he was like, sorry, I just like was passionate about this and wanted to share. And I'm like, what is going on? And eventually like I sent him another message, and then he asked me where I went to high school. And I knew that he lived close to me because I knew what high school he went to because of the guy who came on the show. And eventually I said like we should hang out sometime, just throwing it out there, not even thinking anything would come of it. Like, you know, people say that all the time, like we should hang out, and then you like never do. And he was like, yeah, I'm down. When are you free? I'll drive. And I was like, oh my God. And we went on our first date a week later. And I remember on our first date, like we talked about my podcast. He had listened to episodes I'd made. We talked about like his music. We talked about just like our friends and our lives. And this is cool because I'll come to my non-negotiable list, because some of the things I decided a year before that I wanted in a life partner, or I wanted in a boyfriend or a relationship, whatever, was some of the things that he ended up saying on our fucking first date. So it was like, oh, he's checking a box. Oh, he's checking a box. One of the things I wrote was that I want someone who's independent. I want someone who has his, and I literally wrote, own friends. He has his own friends that he cares about, and he cares about doing things for fun, like by himself. And this was kind of a product of like being in a relationship where I didn't have that. I was like the main fucking social person that my boyfriend had at the time. This was like a while ago. This is like many years ago now, like 3, 4, I don't even know. 4 years ago. Holy crap. Anyway, and so if you're looking for someone who has similar values and interests, fucking do the things you love doing, and it'll attract the right people. Like, literally, it'll attract the right people. I can't even, like, say it enough, because I remember sitting with my therapist, June 4th, 2020, wondering, is there a guy out there who, you know, is all of these things that people say are possible? That's fairy tale shit. Like, is there a guy out there who really will be right for me? Does that exist? And so that's why I sat with my therapist. I made a non-negotiable list where I wanted him to be independent, like I said. I wanted him to be ambitious. And I wrote in brackets, future, career, and personal. Like I wanted him to have his own fucking thing he was working towards and loving. And I wrote that I wanted him to be healthy, mentally and physically. And my ideal list I wrote was open, vulnerable, caring, passionate, driven, and again, independent. And then I wrote like other things that would be great is that I wanted him to be non-judgmental and supportive, like open-minded. I wanted there to be a great sexual connection, and I wanted him to be cuddly. And like, it's really cool looking back on this list, because that was me setting an intention of like, this is what I'm looking for. And if I kind of don't see that in someone on the first few dates, I think it like subconsciously was implanted there. So you could be like, oh, wait, okay, this isn't aligning. Or honestly, I would go on a bunch of first dates and none of them were working out for things that felt like they were out of my control. Like I got ghosted or a guy was a little crazy and like all this stuff was happening. But now when I sit back and reflect, there was such a bigger picture to everything going on. There was such a greater purpose. And I think and I hope that this non-negotiable list was kind of in the back of my head throughout this time. Who knows if it actually was, but things worked out and I have a man who has similar values to me. So I'd like to say it did. And so I hope you got something out of this episode. I would encourage you to sit with yourself, reflect on what you're looking for. And if you're in a relationship, think about the things that you really love sharing and bonding over together. And if that kind of reflects your overall greater values. And one last thought I wanted to share is that in terms of the things you're an activist about, they don't even necessarily need to be an activist about it too, but I think what's most important is that they are supportive and open-minded and non-judgmental. I grew up in communities that were very LGBTQ plus positive, but honestly, we're in completely all white environments because they were art schools and there was a level of like privilege of having to afford going to dance classes or art classes to be able to get in. And they have since changed that with my high school, though, I will say. But this experience for me was completely different than my boyfriend's. He went to an incredibly diverse school, but there was like no talk about LGBTQ plus positivity at all. And so him and I feel very passionately, about completely different topics, but those are things we're able to educate each other on and have these open discussions on and like support each other on and learn from each other. And for me, that's a really important thing to have in a relationship, is this openness and this willingness to learn and respect the other person's beliefs and values and the things that like they're very passionate about. So overall, food for thought. I hope you enjoyed this episode. I'm very excited for next week. Next Monday is our 100th fucking episode, and I'm gonna give some just life fucking updates on some shit that's been going on. I ran into an ex. That's a really fucking weird story, and I'm gonna tell you all the tea on that. So make sure you're subscribed so you don't miss every new episode on Mondays. If you enjoyed this episode, please download it, because that's how people track that shit. That's how the platforms do. Let me know if you liked it. In next week's episode, I'm going to give a teaser on a ton of different episode topics to come, so get ready for that. And follow me on Instagram and TikTok at Human to Human Pod. Bye!